So I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Learning Forward for inviting me to participate in this quite amazing conference. So I am the editor of Education Week. I have done that job for going on 26 years. Like, what the going on with that? And at the risk of sounding a wee bit full of myself, I think have had a pretty good catbird seat to what's gone on in pre-K through 12 education and how we've gotten to where we are today. By definition, I'm a journalist, and that means I've been a chronicler, I'm a synthesizer, a documenter, and an analyzer of the state of play in pre-collegiate education and the transition that follows, whether it's post-secondary education or gainful employment in the workplace. But I do like to share with folks like this who are at this conference. You need to understand that I'm not a disinterested bystander. I care passionately about the impact of our work, about our work to supply high-quality news, information, and other resources in an effort to stoke the demand for better schools, better outcomes for kids, and better communities. Learning Forward has designed this conference to provide educators with the kinds of well-thought-out strategies, high-quality content, and concrete tools that you all can take home to your districts, schools, and classrooms. And this panel, by design, includes 3 forward-looking leaders who are putting a high priority on professional learning and the continuous improvement that it takes to undergird that. With us are Dallas Dance, of the Baltimore County Public Schools, Karen Garza, the superintendent of the Fairfax. You have to jump over at the end, the Fairfax County Public Schools, and Jessica Cunningham. She's the principal of KIPP's DC High School, KIPP DC College Prep. Now, as an aside, or what I wanted to say just to set us up is that at Ed Week, my colleagues and I put professional learning in the bullseye of the most important issues we cover. And as an aside, this topic is personal for me. Just yesterday, I was being interviewed for a story about how successful news organizations have transitioned themselves from the print-only legacy way we used to do things to this new place we find ourselves, to serve consumers of our news and information with new formats, new interactivity, new distribution platforms, and new business models. He asked me to single out the most important thing we have done to evolve ourselves. Without a moment's thought, I answered, deliberate focus on shifting our culture to one that enthusiastically embraces change and the opportunities that come with it. Key to that shift, I said, is supporting the talent development and professional learning of our 100-plus employees. Not big by your standards, big by my standards. Without that commitment and the hard work that comes with it, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I'm not being too dramatic when I say we might not be here at all. K-12 education is currently in the throes of rethinking a century-old system of schooling and is poised, I think, to embrace a new generation of policies, programs, and products that lead to the kind of disruptive as well as sustaining innovation in the field. It's already happening. For those of us in the publishing business, we have been buffeted by it, and all you have to do is think about retail sales to get that picture. So with that kind of big picture set up, I'd like to set out some ground rules for this panel, and these folks are on board with the way this is going to go down. We don't have very much time today, and we have a lot of expertise on this panel. So I'm asking these folks, the first time they talk, to introduce themselves briefly, and then I'm going to ask them a top-of-mind thought to share, and read their bio stuff in the program for other info you might be seeking. I'm asking us all, including me, to be very, very brief, like only a minute or 2 each time you speak, so we can cover as much ground as possible and keep this discussion lively and energetic. One of you has been on a panel with me that I've moderated before, Dallas, and you know that I can be ruthless in cutting off folks if they go on too long. and that I would like to ensure we're going to hit our end mark because, after all, as a journalist, that's what I do. So the goal here is also to get you involved, so we're going to do some lightning round questions toward the end, so be prepared for us to turn to you, okay? Makes sense? So let's see, what order do we want to go in? Let's start with Karen. Introduce yourself and share your top-of-mind thought from your particular perspective about the importance of professional learning in the equation of improving schools and student outcomes.
Again, thank you for having me here today. You have me shaking in my boots.
I know.
So, because goal. My team, a lot of Fairfax County people are in the room, and they'll tell you I'm not known for being succinct, but I'll strive to do that. I'm very proud to be the superintendent of Fairfax County Public Schools. We're the 10th largest school system in the country. We're very diverse, and we're really proud of that. In terms of a Portrait of a Graduate, we believe that provides students with a very unique opportunity to become an effective global citizen. So we have 54,000 students, 187,000 students. About 54,000 of those are students that live in poverty. So we're really having to be challenge the way that we think about the work. So my top of mind thought is, today we have increasing expectations of our schools. There's no doubt about that. I think today our public schools are better than ever in the history of the United States, and I think there's a lot of things that are right about our public schools, and I think that's often missed. But we do know that we have increasing expectations. We have the educational needs of our students are increasing dramatically for a multitude of different reasons. We oftentimes are faced with diminishing resources to support those changing needs. So if we're not constantly thinking about how to improve our practice and how to do things different, if we're not innovating, and if we don't have a growth mindset, we're going to automatically get worse. If we're not really constantly thinking about how we can improve practice. So I think the investment in our people, we're a human intensive enterprise, the ability to respond to the needs of students, it's an important investment, but I think it has to be very focused.
That was good, Karen. Dallas? Yeah?
So good afternoon and welcome to Prince George's County, Maryland. You are not in D.C., as I'm pretty sure someone has already told you already. And just like Karen, I have many of Team BCPS here with me today. Dallas Dance, I'm the superintendent of Baltimore County Public Schools. We are the 25th largest in the country with about 111,000 students. About 55,000 of those students approximately live in poverty. We have 19,000 employees, 175 school centers and programs, and a pretty ambitious theory of action that really talks about preparing our students to be globally competitive graduates by making sure they have access to a digital learning environment and learning a second language prior to graduation. And the importance of professional development from my lens is 85% of any educational's budget is people. And so when you start thinking about leadership is all about people. And so building capacity in those individuals, not training them because we train animals, but building capacity in those people to be able to move the work forward is extremely important. And from my lens, the way we've been able to do that is we've actually elevated the Department of Professional Development to a cabinet level position. We have a chief of organizational effectiveness who actually reports directly to me, who actually drives all of the organizational development for the school system, not just on the academic side, but also on the business services side as well.
That's great, Dallas. Jessica?
Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Cunningham. I'm the principal of the KIPP High School in Washington, D.C. KIPP is the second largest school district in DCPS. So there's in D.C. So there's DCPS, and then KIPP D.C. serves the largest amount of students in the district after DCPS. We operate 17 schools in D.C., over 160 nationally. And our high school, all of our schools are very much college prep. We set very ambitious goals as a national organization, and since we were founded in Houston over 20 years ago, to ensure that all of our kids graduate from college. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. But our work is very intentional around ensuring that that happens for as many students as possible. In terms of professional development or professional learning, I think you know, it's been quoted in lots of studies, you know, all over the place that the teachers are our main change agents. You know, the child's teacher is the single most determining factor in terms of that kid's success. And so if we know that, then obviously training teachers, developing teachers, and leaders has got to be the #1 priority, because that makes all the difference for kids. In terms of innovation, I think it's almost interesting that I don't know how these two feel, but I certainly don't think we're necessarily innovating. I think there's a ton of things out there that work, and what I feel like my role is figuring out what's going to work for my team and my kids. And maybe that's a form of innovation, but I actually think there's already a ton of work out there and things that are happening in terms of professional learning and teacher development that actually do work well, and we have to figure out how do we facilitate that for more teachers and make it even better.
Karen, how did you come to the vision for professional learning PD in your district? Who was involved with coming to that vision and coming with the strategic priorities that follow?
A lot of our work in Fairfax County Public Schools is based around our Portrait of a Graduate, which is around how we shift our thinking around how we're preparing students for the future, a world that's rapidly changing that really we can't even begin to comprehend. We put together a large stakeholder group of citizens. We spent almost a year purposefully visiting with our parents, master teachers, expert principals, business leaders in the community, community and civic leaders. And I will tell you that was one of the most, and I've been in this business almost 30 years, it was one of the most impactful work that I've been a part of in terms of how rare it is that we ask our community what it is, their hopes and dreams for their children. And I will tell you that we spent quite a bit of time developing that, and I think as a result of that, we have a lot of ownership around that work. So I would say that anything that we do, we have to engage our teacher leaders and our campus-based leadership in what we design. I think oftentimes that's why professional development, you know, we've hear sometimes from teachers that it's not effective, or they feel that it's a waste of time. I believe that anytime we engage our teacher leaders in helping us design professional development and help us provide, connect it to the real work, I think they find it meaningful. All of our teachers want to do their very best for children, but they don't want to feel like we're wasting their time.
So Dallas, how do you ensure ownership of this important priority?
Sure, and very similar to what Karen did back in 2012 when we developed Blueprint 2.0, we held over 200 community meetings, met with over 2,000 individuals, came up with what we wanted our goal and our theory of action to be, but we realized that we had our own local goals that we were trying to achieve in terms of globally competitive graduates, but we had state goals that were sort of embedded upon us as well as national goals. And so with that, we knew we had to turn ourselves into a learning organization. And so we knew we couldn't just focus on learning at the classroom level. Adults needed to be chief learners for students. And so this was letting our guard down, and there were many people who went into many new positions within the organization, so title and position didn't matter. This was about being risk takers, being innovators, and figuring out how do we work together to make sure the organization moves forward. So with that, we all had to learn. And so with that process, we knew that through the Office of Organizational Effectiveness, we then could put our own selves in terms of personalized learning for us so we can better benefit kids. But it started with our Blueprint 2.0.
So Jessica, you mentioned teachers, teacher leaders as needing to be an important part of the equation, as did the couple of other people here. What does KIPP do for that as a whole, and what are you doing at the school building level to reflect that?
So one of the things that distinguishes KIPP from other school districts and CMOs is that there's a tremendous amount of decentralization. So it's actually almost impossible to answer that question about what does KIPP do, because it depends on each region and each school. At my school, we basically created a teacher leadership pipeline and changed the structure in terms of making sure department chairs didn't teach full load, so that department chairs who are in theory and in practice in our building, the best teachers in the building, are actually taking ownership and coaching and mentoring formally coaching and mentoring some of our teachers, and really taking the lead on pushing the curricula and design and vision for each department. And they're part of the school's leadership team now.
So let me just ask a question generally, and anybody jump in on the idea of there's not enough time for any of us to do all of what we're trying to get done. So what have you all done to ensure you capture the time to have authentic professional learning opportunities available?
I think that's the resource that we struggle with the very most. We never have enough time. But we have stepped back and really looked at our, part of it is having a master schedule that is conducive and provides as much time as possible. So we have, I think, a fairly innovative master schedule. We have the traditional days at the beginning of the school year. We also have the traditional days kind of throughout the year. But we also have monthly strategic school planning days where teachers can collaborate. And so we've built it into our calendar. But that's not sufficient. A lot of what needs to happen at the campus level. And I think the most important investment we can make is giving our teachers and our school-based teams enough time to really collaborate and examine student work and work together and really maximize the talents that we know exist throughout our system.
Dallas or Jessica?
So very similar in Baltimore County. We had a really intense conversation during the 13-14 school year on school scheduling. And how do we make sure that our high school and our middle schools are really structured so that it allows teachers to have common planning time built in within the day? Because what we saw is that a lot of our schools would have that time built in the afternoon, but it wouldn't happen. Teachers are ready to go home, but not just that. After a long day, they have personal responsibilities they have to do, and they just weren't quite necessarily ready to actually do some of that work. So master scheduling was one. The calendar was another one where we've worked with our Teachers Association to really build in different times throughout the year where we know we need to actually have site-based versus district-based PD. And there's a balance there of making sure that we have district-led initiatives where we know schools need to get that information, but also you want to open that up for site-based decisions as well. But I think the biggest investment that we've made is what we call the stat teacher. So every single school in Baltimore County, and I didn't ask the county for any new money to do this, has what we call a stat teacher, which is traditionally a professional development teacher who works directly with departments or grade levels in terms of what does it look like to create student-centered learning environments? What does it look like to analyze data, to actually make scheduling decisions based on kids and student data needs that we have? So that investment that we made for all 175 schools and programs have really helped us out because this person is not an administrator. This person is a coach, they're a mentor, they're a peer, along with their colleagues to move instruction forward.
Jessica?
I think what Karen said around just creating the structures and being very intentional about that is key. Last year, we moved to early dismissals every other week on Wednesdays. We call them Data Wednesdays. Our students get out at 2:30. And that time is held as sacred just to do data review and student work review within departments and sometimes as a school. I think the piece around sacred time, I think the trick, though, with time in general, and I think I've seen this, I've fallen prey to this as a leader oftentimes. Whatever time you have to treat it as sacred. And so it really doesn't matter if it's an hour a week or 4 hours a week or an hour a month. You have to protect that time with all your might. And if you protect that time and make that time efficient and essential, it becomes less about how often it happens or how long or for how long it lasts.
So I took a couple minutes at the front to talk about the importance of the culture of the organization and the district or school or whatever. And I would say that's, as I said, that was the hardest thing for me in my work, is to ensure that our culture was adjusting to embrace it. PD, or now we've even rebranded it a bit with professional learning, has gotten a bad rap over the years. So how do you ensure that your teachers, your administrators, and all your school personnel are embracing the importance of this and the energy to put behind it, and not just say, we've been here, we've done that, we just aren't going to invest in this? Jess?
The first thing that came to mind was they have to drive the agenda. And so your professional learning agenda or initiatives must be data-driven. And when teachers understand that the initiative or the priority is driven by the data, then I think that it just creates more buy-in right there. If they know, like, we are doing this because only 30% of our kids met the proficiency level or advanced level in math or in the Algebra 1 strand on this particular test, and so that's why we have this huge Algebra 1 initiative, that makes more sense to myself as a former teacher. I also think leaders have to be in it with the teachers, and so I think that when you create a culture of constant learning and teachers see the leader in the PD, heck, I want to learn learn it too. I don't teach Algebra 1, but I need to know what's going on in those classrooms. I need to understand your struggle. And so even if I can't stay for the entire 2-hour training, or even if I can't go to the conference with you, you need to see that I'm just as bought in to the learning, and I want to understand how it works and how it's going to work for our kids, because when they see the leader is invested, then they're more invested as well.
Do you set concrete objectives for your school that then you pursue through professional learning?
Yes.
And around what kinds of things? Student performance?
Student performance is probably the biggest. I mean, student outcomes and performance drive pretty much everything in our organization. And I'd say second to that is teacher feedback. So right now we're in the middle of like survey bonanza, where we are, the surveys are annoying, but I actually made it part of the staff meeting yesterday. We're all gonna sit in this room, get out our laptops, and we're gonna complete the survey. Because I need the data, because I need to know what you need so that I can develop the programming for you so that you can feel like you are being served and supported.
And do you have accountability kind of baked into this?
For me or for them? Because yes
well,
and yes.
let's talk about that. For the grown-ups, yeah.
Yes, I think it's an easier question for me to ask as someone who runs one school.
Yeah.
You work for me. There's not we are going to do this. It's a much harder and more complicated question to answer when you're talking about thousands of teachers across the district.
Yeah. Well, but your individual teachers in your building, it's built into their own.
It's part of the job.
Yeah. Karen.
Well, I'll tell you, in Fairfax County Public Schools, we've had a history of having strong professional development and pathways for whatever career or whatever teachers want to be supported in. So, but I will tell you, with that said, we're not there yet. We're still trying to figure it out and trying to get better. There are challenges associated with scaling up some of what we know works. And so I think that's a very real issue that you raised. Culture, we talk about it all the time. And I think Bill Daggett or someone said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, or Trump's strategy. We know that. And we know that leaders are building culture every day by everything that they do. So I think it's hiring the right leadership mind, people with the right leadership mind. And I don't think leadership necessarily is positional. I think it's interpersonal. So it doesn't have to be necessarily the principal, but with any decision, any hiring decision we make, making sure that we're hiring the right people and then providing the right supportive conditions. But I do think, as you alluded to, if it's valued and important and a priority of the leadership, and if it's modeled, I think in a previous, I think it was the secretary who talked about the humility that's needed. We have to demonstrate the humility that we are learners and that we are open all the time to new learnings and to getting better. So I think the culture piece is very important, not just in the area of professional development and learning, but with everything that we do.
Do you set district-level objectives that are explicit and then communicated?
With regard to professional development, I think we're trying to get better there. In Fairfax County, we like to make, in fact, I say we overcomplicate everything. We take a great idea and we make it really complex. And I think that we're striving for clarity and alignment. Like, for example, this year, our principal meetings and our professional development for our teacher leaders and throughout our system, we're focused on literacy. And we said this year we are going to perfect our learning. We're going to get better around the area of literacy and aligning that to our Portrait of a Graduate. So I think we're still striving for that. I don't think we're there yet. I think our number one goal is to make sure that we're really focused and aligned.
So Dallas, for you, you can have at this too, but also the issue of how you ensure resources, not just time and money, but all resources are aligned with this vision and these objectives we've got.
Sure. I go back to, for us, it's all based on our strategic plan, which, again, very transparent, apparently is online. And what we've had to police ourselves is if it's not in that plan, it doesn't get done. Because if it's not focused, then everything becomes a priority for the organization. And again, with 85% of that budget being people, even though we run school systems are businesses that are in the business of teaching and learning. So if 85% of that budget is people, is how do you build, again, capacity in people? And for me, quite frankly, it is leadership. So I think teachers are the most important people within the organization, but principals are the most influential. You know, when you have 175 school centers and programs, Dallas Dance can't be in every single school. You know, I make it a goal to try to be in every school at least once a year when I can. But the principals are there on the ground. They know exactly what their schools, in fact, need. I think organizations our size, we set organizational goals that, again, are based on our Blueprint 2.0. But then I have principals to actually work with their assistant superintendents, and I have 2 of them here today who work with their schools to figure out how do we get this done. Because I know that schools are going to be at different levels in order to move that work forward, but that's the role of the assistant superintendent working hand in hand with the principal, and the importance of having that stat teacher as well. Resource allocation, for the most part, always will be, first of all, your people, making sure you have people in the right places on the bus, making sure that you're actually allocating positions to where you need them the most. And this goes back to the school progress plan. And all of us as administrators and teachers, we hate the school improvement plan. We always did. Right? So at the beginning of the year, central office would ask for the plan, and you would do pretty much whatever you wanted to do with the plan because you knew somebody was probably not going to read the plan, and it was going to go in a binder, right? And then you would pull it out in July or August of the following year, and you'd update it. Well, what we've tried to do is really revamp that to where the school progress plan really drives the needs of the school. Really, so getting to, if our goal is, 80% in something, there's a root cause of why we're not at 80% right now. So if we get to the root cause of it, which in most cases is based all on equity, if we get to the root cause of that, then we can actually make sure our resources are then driven toward getting to the root cause of why that behavior is the way it is. Then we can drive our own individual learning in terms of changing that behavior. And then schools with their school progress plans can put in individualized positions if they need in order to drive that school goal.
So
May
when
I add to that?
Of course.
From a resource perspective, there's never enough resource. I mean, we all, I think, have struggled through that. I think it's how we're using the resources we have available to us. And we've tried over the last several years to focus on the dollars that we spend in professional learning, that we do that in a way that is high leverage. For an example, we've invested quite a bit in the instructional rounds process. And we believe that that's an improvement process that can pay off dividends today, but certainly into the future can continue to pay big dividends. Project-based learning, so really making sure that what limited dollars we may have, that not only, and you'll see all this like Dallas reflected in our strategic plan, but making sure that whatever we're investing in has high leverage, is developing capacity and can be translated over time, over whatever that problem of practice might be, that we have a process for improvement.
So I'm struck when I was preparing for this, and I love, Dallas, what you said about we can have 100 priorities and then it's all a big mush and nothing's really getting focus. So there really are top priorities, right? Even within professional learning or PD, there's a whole range of things you could be working on. So how do you determine that mix of what professional learning opportunities, ranging from, individual educator growth kinds of approaches or offerings to things that are focused on district, state, and other objectives?
Sure. There's a balance, and there has to be. So as a system, you're going to have district-level initiatives and focus areas that you have district-wide you need to move forward based on district-level data. But then you also have to make sure there's a balance with what individual schools, teachers may need as well, too. Again, this is the importance of the stat teacher and what that individual does working with principals and assistant superintendents. But as a district, what we've done is we've analyzed district and school-level data. And what we realized is that the biggest issue facing our school system is this whole idea around equity. And this is just not a conversation, right? But how do we really challenge our own policies, our practices, to figure out why do we have the results that we're having? So every organization is perfectly structured to get the results that you're getting, unless you have critical conversations and put people in critical positions in order to change that. So for us, equity drives much of our conversation. Matter of fact, there was 2 equity trainings going on today where board members were at. But we know that if we have these tough conversations around what are adult decisions that we're making that are exacerbating the achievement gap, we can actually make some difference in terms of what we're doing. But the other thing we're doing is around student-centered learning. And everyone always talks about what that really looks like and feels like. It means when you go into a classroom, students are getting exactly what they need at the exact moment they need it. So while the reading block for some students might need to be 90 minutes, for some students it might need to be 2.5 hours. right? How do we make sure the day is structured so that we leverage technology in order to be able to do that? Again, for me, in an organization our size, is working directly with principals who know exactly what they're doing in their schools, giving them the monthly PD they need. And so what we've had to challenge ourselves is in terms of information that leaders need to get. If it can't go in an email, then we need to figure out how else to give it to them, because we know that when we have them once a month, that's their own leadership development. And they will tell us, just like teachers will, the best PD they can get is time with their colleagues. Right? So we need to balance the organizational goals versus what individually they might need too, but that's where principals, assistant superintendents, and stat teachers come in hand.
So I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to turn it to Jessica. How do you determine, though? Somebody's got to decide what that balance is.
Absolutely, and so this is where we have to police ourselves as leadership. So, Mondays I meet with my cabinet, and basically we still police ourselves around the strategic plan. We basically have still set what the district goals are. We update our board several times throughout the year on those district goals. But based on those district goals, every single school might be at different places. We monitor that based on the school progress plan. So everyone's progress plan is all based on 2 academic goals and a cultural goal. So we know that, so then assistant superintendents, again, working with principals and stat teachers, figure out how do they move their schools along and move their teachers along. So we're not all gonna stay in the same place. That's sort of the non-negotiable. But we know we're all gonna be at different levels and need different supports. That's how we monitor ourselves in terms of getting it done. But, in terms of what personalized learning might look like at one middle school and another middle school, it's still in the school progress plan for both schools. What it might look like in terms of support might be different.
So Jessica, tackle this kind of ball of issues.
I'm glad you addressed that it's a ball of issues.
Thank you.
Could you clarify your original question for
Well,
me?
I'm just looking for, of all the things that you could put on your menu of PD offerings, somebody's got to decide, or somebody's working together, what they're going to be and how they're going to align and how they're going to be resourced.
So I think the best way to answer your question is to walk you through our process. Summer is my favorite time of year, and it's not because the kids aren't in school. It's because, I think for everyone all school-based people, and I think at the district level, it's like summer's like renewed hope, right? It's because that's when you can go into reflection and planning. Like, you close out that school year, and now you're really not ending, you're starting. Which I love, and I think that starting that process every May, June, of looking at every piece of data, and I'm not just talking about test scores, I'm talking about that anecdotal evidence, those conversations with those parents, conversations with kids. Teenagers give some of the most authentic feedback you can ever receive in your life, and really tackling all of that and kind of figuring out what are the consistent themes that we're seeing. What are the consistent academic themes? Where are our kids consistently struggling? Back to what Dallas said, what is the root cause of those struggles, both cultural and academic? What are our parents consistently saying? Are the trends just in 9th grade or 5th grade, or like just figuring out kind of where is the problem starting? What's causing the problem, and being just very honest with ourselves. Are we the team that's best equipped to tackle that problem? Because going back to your point, Ginny, there are lots of things that we could tackle, but I think districts and schools have to be very honest with themselves about the things that, can we do it or not? And if we can't even touch it, then maybe the answer is let's put our community, our families in touch with resources who can address those issues, but we have to prioritize this particular issue because we are well equipped to handle this.
So Karen, let me have you weigh in, and part of what I'm trying to get at is the state mandates things, get your safety, certain things checked off, and which isn't particularly germane to you, Jessica, so how do you deal with this?
I do think there's a natural tension that exists between state and federal mandates and even division-wide mandates and what the true needs at the school-based level are. I think that's a natural tension, and even one step further, what my individual needs for learning are at the teacher level, and they may be different from teacher to teacher. I think first and foremost, we have to use data to drive those decisions, to making sure, looking at our outcomes, and where do we need to get better. I think that's a natural place to start. I do think technology helps us a lot here because we do have a lot of requirements. And I think where we can use technology, we use MyPLC a lot of online, those things that can be just delivered and you don't need the time for collaboration necessarily, just we need to make sure that we check the box that the individual educator understands it and knows that information. And a lot of the state level training can be handled in that way, or the state level compliance requirements. I will tell you, I think we need to go, we've got a long way to go. Thank goodness we have a great state superintendent. We've got a long way to go to make sure that the required state training is adds value, and I'm not sure that we always feel like it does add value. I think it's also often seen as an interruption. So I think we have a long way to go there with some of the required trainings. But first and foremost, I think there's a natural, I think we have to allow a good bit of our professional development to be driven by the campus needs with the right kind of support, with division-wide priorities, which, as I mentioned before, around for us this year, it's literacy.
So I can't believe you anticipated my question. What if there's state people sitting in the audience right now from Virginia?
I'm sorry if I've offended any state person.
No, I mean,
We don't want to get in trouble.
What would you say to the state that it could do to help you?
You know, I think I get that where we have schools that are not meeting a predetermined standard, that we need to be able to demonstrate that we are serious about that improvement. I think many school systems, particularly our size, we have the capacity at the system level to provide to those, respond to those needs. We have a differentiated support model that I think is very well done. We're really getting very promising results from those. So I think state agencies need to allow where a local division can demonstrate that they've been thoughtful and have a plan and can execute and are willing to demonstrate those outcomes. I think they need to allow us some freedom to do that. I recognize, though, that not all school systems are equipped or have the kind of support that we have and the kind of personnel we have to do that. So there has to be some of that, but allow us to run if we have it.
So Dallas, you're in another state, but also have big districts, so I'm going to guess you would echo some of that. What should the feds be doing? And you can also weigh in on the state.
So, and I totally agree with Karen that when you have large school systems with the capacity to do some of this work, I think about my colleagues though, and even though Maryland only has 24 school systems, you know, we range from 160,000 students in Montgomery County to 2,500 students in some localities. And where states can really be beneficial is for those districts that don't have the resources, how do you provide the necessary supports without being viewed as just compliance? Right, so I don't know necessarily what the time is right now, but I know the Senate is voting on ESAA tomorrow, and with that bill expected to pass, I think a lot of flexibility will roll back to states, which for those of us with a true focus on equity, we get a little bit concerned when we start thinking about making sure that every single state has an equity agenda in their lens. But I believe that the state of Maryland definitely has that at the forefront. I think we're going to be looking for our state to really come together with school systems around a state accountability model that does allow for local flexibility. To where we think through this idea that parents absolutely deserve to have their child grow at least one academic year every single year they're here with us. When should that assessment, if there is a paper pencil assessment, should be given? If a young person comes in the door in October and they're able to pass an assessment, should we have to wait until May for that student to take the assessment, or can that student actually be accelerated because he or she has already met that expectation for that grade level? Those are types of innovative models that we're going to be looking to states to sort of give local school systems the flexibility and be able to provide support to those school systems that want to move forward but may not necessarily have the capacity in order to be able to do so. But I do believe with the reauthorization, a lot of the federal mandates will be rolled back to the state level for guidance.
I hope you all have at least some questions starting to percolate, and I'm going to turn to you after I ask Jessica. How do you think about aligning the professional learning kinds of offerings and opportunities with your, let's say, goals around moving students along, higher student performance, and toward being college and career ready? In other words, standards is what I'm, without using the CC kind of way of talking.
I think the alignment is very clear when your mission is clear. And so because we are college prep, because we are very much focused on ACT at our school, and that was a very intentional choice, ACT instead of SAT. And so like our assessment bar is clear, our long-term mission is clear, and our relentless focus on student achievement data as well as other data from our kids and families. I just think that, I don't know, I haven't had much heartache over what jumps out about all of that information and how that should dictate your steps forward. I think the biggest challenge for us is figuring out when. Like what needs to happen now versus 6 months from now versus what can you table for the upcoming school year or what's 2 years out in terms of being able to facilitate. I think that's the bigger challenge because and maybe it's, I was a former middle school principal. I also think this is kind of easier to do as the kids get older because the clock is ticking and the bar is clear. Even if regardless of whether you agree with that bar in terms of college admission standards, it is the bar. And so once you have a clear bar and a clear goal, it's trying to figure out when and how do you make it all happen. Does that answer your question, Ginny?
Yeah, well, and Karen and Dallas, I mean, with all the attention and work toward a standards-based kind of frame for student learning, I've seen amazing things going on in districts and schools, and contrary to the media, not us, things are going incredibly well in many places, but it's uneven throughout the country. And so what are your kind of lessons learned as you think about professional development around college and career ready standards work that you're doing with your educators, administrators, who are educators? How much of the mix of PD are you spending on that?
That one's a little harder, I think, to answer because, in fact, we just were talking about this last week in our school system. Standards are almost around a fixed mindset, and how do we kind of break the mold from that fixed mindset? We're trying to really focus on the future skills that our students need, and I think sometimes when our focus is exclusively around the standards, it becomes about the standards versus about the learning. And so we're trying to shift our system to be around. For an example, our school system's doing some wonderful work around capstone projects. We have one at the 5th grade level that I think is a real standard that we're trying to implement in some other grades. Project-based learning, where we really take the standards and make them relevant and meaningful to students. I do think we have some other tools to help make sure that we're evaluating the lesson design, the things that we're planning for students to do. We like the rigor relevance framework because it helps define what rigor is, because for some folks rigor just means more versus that higher standard of college readiness. So I think that's difficult to answer, but I do think there needs to be a shift from the standards to the real learning.
That's helpful. Dallas.
So Jenny, you go into schools all throughout the country, and I know many of us around the room do it as well too. I have not gone into a great school where there's not been a great principal. And so with that being the case, I think the most important thing we can do is still focus our efforts around leadership development. Right? And so there are a lot of principals who will say, I know what true authentic learning looks like when I see it, but I know I also need to go deeper into learning what these new standards in fact look and feel like. Right? So if I feel confident in this, then as I sit with my teachers and actually come up with experiences that we can give our kids, we can actually make sure they are back mapped to standards so we can make sure that we're not quote unquote teaching to the test. Right? So if we know we've actually covered and our students have mastered the standard, we don't worry about giving so many summative assessments because formatively, I'm actually driving instruction by knowing my students have in fact mastered the standards. Most recently, there was a survey that was put out with states that have transitioned to new college and career ready standards, which, and so we all know those as Common Core state standards. In terms of the perception that teachers have in terms of their mastering of those standards versus the reality of their mastering of those standards, and there's a huge gap in that. So in terms of professional learning, I think for us organizationally, and again, look at scale, which is always a concern with large school systems, is how do you make sure principals feel comfortable and confident enough to when they're sitting with teachers and department chairs and stat teachers and even team leaders, that they know the standards deep enough to start thinking about those experiences we can give kids in order to master those standards.
Dallas, I always say, so goes the principal, so goes the school, right?
So I see we have a microphone here. Does anybody want to get up and ask any of these three, all three, a question? I can keep going. Sharon Robinson, you didn't know I saw you. You're coming up to the mic, and I'm going to ask you a question. I want you introduce yourself, and what is the role of teacher education programs in supporting districts?
That role is evolving to be a partner with school districts.
Sharon, who are you?
Oh, I'm Sharon Robinson. I have the privilege to work for the colleges of education across the country, and it's almost impossible to resist the idea that that you can sit back and watch this with academic interest, because to be a part of the workforce development dynamic in a community, you have to be engaged with school districts. And if you are looking for what do the data suggest, there's really one key target of intervention, which is the clinical development of the novice practitioner, the learning process. It's not what you know, but what you can do with what you know to implement good practice. And that can't happen as a theoretical proposition. That has to happen through engaging the head, the heart, the hands, and really good eyes to watch the impact so that you know when to do something different. And it is bringing a school staff together at that local school level as a principal, mindful of that portfolio of talent necessary for all the functions that must be in evidence with effective results at the school level, with the support of a school district that wants to nurture those functions as well. So our job now has evolved to become a partner at the point of service delivery, because you can't have teachers who are practice ready at a novice with novice expectations unless they get trained or developed in an authentic arena of practice. So it's really an exciting time.
So do you have an example or two you'd like to offer up, places doing it?
Well, there are examples all around. Virginia Commonwealth University, for example, not far from here, and your school, teacher quality partnership with Towson University. I mean, I would venture that of the industry-wide, about a third of them are involved at some level of developing a partnership with the practice community. And I really am hoping to live to see a day when we see ourselves as a professional community learning to work together to provide high-quality educational services, no matter the age of the learner, and no matter the address of the institution, whether it's university-based or community-based. So it's nice to see this coming together as an industry, but we are really at the very beginning stages of crystallizing that vision so that we can act in a unified way. But I see it happening, and where it is happening, it becomes a community-based dynamic. One superintendent in South Carolina that works with Winthrop College, a school in a rural community, very high poverty students with very high ambitions for their future. And the superintendent said, this has become a community dynamic for learning and development. And it is the way that we see ourselves coming into a future with a vibrant economic base. So these things have ripples that we cannot always see immediately and may not be there when nirvana happens but you have to believe. And I think that I see teacher education becoming part of the action and not just with academic interests. We own it. We have to be in it up to our elbows.
So I appreciate you calling out VCU as a two-time graduate. You're exactly right in what they've done with the Metro Richmond area. But no, I had to say that, my VCU plug. But no, you're exactly right. With Towson, what we've done with Towson is, and it's very fortunate we're in Baltimore County where I can run to Towson from my office, is really said, how do we make sure that we work together to sort of redesign the School of Ed to where I don't want a student coming out to have their, their student teaching experience to be their senior year. They should be going in their first year in the School of Ed into classrooms. And so they've actually moved some of the courses from the School of Ed into our schools to where they can actually, they're talking about it in theory and what it should look like. They go model it in classrooms or see it in practice, then come back and talk about it. They have reflective teachers along with them. Where we've seen it work, though, is because the leadership existed for it to happen. Some of the pushback that I know I've gotten as I've tried to recruit additional candidates of color is that the leadership doesn't quite exist because you're going to get pushback from your professors. And when that happens, it has to be a dean or a president to be willing to say, but this is why we do it. And it can only happen if the school system then says it's a business. And if you don't want to give me the graduates that I know I need to go in my classrooms, then I'm going to take my recruiting somewhere else. But that takes politics and political savvy in order to be able to do that as well, too.
I really appreciate your comments. I'm hopeful about, I see many more of the relationships, as you alluded to, that, we used to have to hire teachers and then we would retool them in the first couple of weeks of school or try to, and we would just, like drink out of a water hose. And I think we've been much more intentional and thoughtful. But I think it also applies, I see some great partnerships, George Mason University and some others around leadership development as well. So it's not, I think it goes well beyond preparing teachers for success in the classroom.
I am respectful of the time on this session because, as I understand it, you all raced to somewhere else without any time in between. So would you all join me in thanking our panelists? Have a wonderful, productive conference. Thank you.